Yes, Andy, the company that makes the Gripen told CTV News that 10,000 research and manufacturing jobs could land in Canada if Ottawa adds the Swedish fighter jet to its military fleet.
It's important for Canada to have sovereign capability in Canada to do their own upgrades, to build parts of it, to do final assembly and tests. We, as Saab, we are prepared to do that technology transfer to Canada and support that build-up.
Canada is poised to scupper one of the biggest military deals of the decade, and this move could change the entire balance of power in North America. What began as a routine purchase of fighter jets has now escalated into a political storm with global implications. Billions of dollars, the country's sovereignty, and the influence of the U.S. in the Western world are at stake. And the key to this storm is not the American F-35, but the modest Swedish Gripen fighter jet, which is suddenly getting a new engine from Rolls-Royce, and with it a chance to break free from American control forever. For decades, the U.S. has maintained its leadership in defense aviation, not only thanks to technology, but also through a finely tuned network of dependencies. Virtually every military aircraft supplied to allies had components in its design that allowed Washington to dictate terms. And suddenly, a breach appears in the system. Gripen, a fighter jet developed by Sweden, has long been considered an alternative. It is cheaper, easier to maintain, adapted to harsh climatic conditions, and capable of operating from short runways. But it had one vulnerable element: its American engine. This meant that any country that bought the Gripen would still be dependent on the U.S. But now the situation is changing. Rolls-Royce, one of the oldest and most respected aircraft engine manufacturers in the world, is preparing a revolutionary step: the creation of an all-British engine for the Swedish aircraft. And this is a real geopolitical sensation. For Canada, this decision could be a turning point. Against the backdrop of protracted problems with the purchase of the F-35, constant delays, rising costs, and growing pressure from the U.S., Gripen is beginning to look not just like an alternative, but like a symbol of independence. In a country where thousands of kilometers of cold Arctic zone require reliability rather than luxury, the choice is obvious. But this choice is not just about technology. Tensions are mounting between Ottawa and Washington. Trade disputes, political recriminations, and the threat of new tariffs are making even the closest allies increasingly cautious. The question is no longer which aircraft is better. The question is who will control Canadian skies. And if Canada bets on Gripen, it will not be just a purchase, but a geopolitical statement. This choice is being watched closely in Europe, Asia, and of course the Pentagon. Because if Canada, one of the United States' oldest allies, dares to stray from Washington's line, others may follow suit. This conflict is not about wings. It is about power, independence, and the future of an entire region. And this is only the beginning. For almost 2 decades, Canada has been following a predetermined course in modernizing its air force. From the outset, it was assumed that American F-35s would form the backbone of the country's new air fleet, ensuring compatibility with NATO and NORAD, as well as strengthening ties with the Pentagon. On paper, it all looked logical. One of the most advanced fighter jets in the world, invisible to radar, integrated into the global infrastructure of allies. Washington, for its part, made no secret of its satisfaction. Canada remained within the sphere of U.S. influence, continuing to participate in joint operations and procurement. Against this backdrop, competitors, including Sweden's Gripen, seemed like nothing more than background noise. However, even then, doubts were in the air. The price of the deal was rising, deadlines were shifting, and the F-35 itself was increasingly becoming the target of criticism both within the U.S. and among its allies. No one expected that in 2025, the vector would change dramatically. The first warning sign was an internal audit commissioned by the new government. The results were leaked to the press. The total cost of the program had risen by almost 40%, exceeding 28 billion Canadian dollars. This caused a wave of outrage, not only among the public, but also among the military, who faced technical difficulties in training pilots and maintaining even the F-35s that had already been delivered. At the same time, geopolitical tensions between Canada and the US began to rise. A new round of trade tariffs initiated by Donald Trump's administration hit the Canadian economy hard. The idea of paying billions for American aircraft against the backdrop of Washington's protectionist measures seemed politically toxic. Against this backdrop, an unexpected rise of an alternative candidate began, the Swedish Gripen. Previously perceived as an insignificant option for poor countries or a temporary solution, the situation has now changed. Gripen turned out to be exactly what Canada needed: lightweight, reliable, easy to maintain, and, most importantly, adapted to the harsh northern climate. Its ability to take off from short, icy runways, operate in extremely low temperatures, and be maintained by a minimal ground crew made it the ideal choice for operations in the Arctic. But even the Gripen had a weak point: its engine. Until recently, it used the American General Electric F414 power plant, which effectively left the entire design under Washington's control. This meant that any export contract, any technical upgrade, even the transfer of aircraft to third countries required US approval. This did not seem so critical, say, until British Rolls-Royce entered the scene. The company unexpectedly announced a project to create a fully European engine for the Gripen. The media called it checkmate for the United States. Such an engine would not only allow countries purchasing the Gripen to circumvent US export restrictions, but would also become a symbol of the new defense independence of Europe and its partners. The reaction was immediate. Closed consultations began in Washington. NATO raised the issue of the risk of technological stratification within the alliance. However, Canada, tired of political ultimatums and economic traps, saw this as an opportunity. According to some leaks, as early as August 2025, the first demonstration flights of the Gripen, equipped with an experimental Rolls-Royce engine, took place in one of the closed hangars in Quebec. Although officials have not confirmed this information, diplomatic circles are talking about Canada's open turn towards North Atlantic autonomy. Additional tension was caused by the fact that, according to analysts, the new engine will not only free the Gripen from American control, but also improve its flight performance. According to leaks from Saab, the planned engine promises to increase the combat radius by almost 10% and reduce fuel consumption by 8%, which is especially important for Arctic patrols. Thus, this is not just an alternative, but serious competition for the F-35, especially considering the cost, half as much with almost comparable combat capabilities. Behind the scenes in Ottawa, there is already talk of partially abandoning the purchase of the F-35 in favor of a mixed fleet, where the Gripen will take on the role of a workhorse, and American stealth fighters will remain for special missions. This decision, although a compromise, has the potential to change the country's entire military strategy. Moreover, such a move sets a precedent that could be followed by other U.S. allies dissatisfied with both Washington's policies and protracted military contracts. Thus, a story that began as a typical defense deal is turning into a complex game at the intersection of technology, politics, and geopolitics. And Canada unwittingly finds itself at the epicenter of this transformation. Gripen, with a British heart and Swedish engineering, is already changing the rules today. Whereas previously the debate surrounding the choice of fighter jet for the Royal Canadian Air Force revolved around technical specifications, logistics, and budget, now political conflict has come to the fore. The purchase of the F-35 is no longer seen as a neutral decision in favor of a NATO ally. Against the backdrop of economic disagreements with Washington and growing pressure from American lobbyists, the issue of fleet modernization is turning into a struggle for political sovereignty. In the corridors of Parliament, opinions are already being voiced that the purchase of Gripen is not just a contract, but a strategic choice in favor of freedom from external influence. And for many Canadians, this argument is beginning to outweigh everything else. Political tensions between Canada and the U.S. are reaching a new peak. After verbal attacks from the White House, in which Canada was called an ungrateful neighbor, and even the 51st state that has forgotten for too long who protects it, the mood in Ottawa is changing dramatically. The question is increasingly being asked, is Canada really obliged to obey the defense logic imposed from across the ocean? Especially considering that in recent years, the US has imposed tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminum, and even wheat, while continuing to insist on billion-dollar contracts in its favor. Against this backdrop, Gripen is becoming more than just a fighter jet. It is turning into a symbol of the desire for autonomy. Within the country, this is beginning to grow into a political movement. Several major opposition parties have stated that they will support a review of the defense agreement if the government refuses to purchase the F-35 in its entirety. Canadian veterans, including former pilots, publish open letters supporting the idea of creating a mixed fleet. Independent studies appear claiming that Gripen is capable of performing up to 75% of the tasks that the F-35 can, but at half the cost and with twice the speed of maintenance. However, the main argument in favor of the Gripen remains not price, but geography. Canada is one of the few NATO countries whose airspace extends over the Arctic. And this is not just an empty space on the map. It is a huge area where extreme temperatures, high humidity, and polar winds pose a real challenge for any equipment. Despite its technology, the F-35 was not designed with such conditions in mind. Gripen, on the other hand, was created for operation in a similar climate and has already proven its reliability in the northern regions of Sweden and Finland. Moreover, recent unofficial tests in Nunavut have shown that the Gripen is capable of performing full patrols for 48 hours without access to large air bases. Using mobile ground modules, the Swedish fighter was refueled, reloaded, and back in the air in just 30 minutes. The American side tried to refute these findings, stating that the test conditions were not representative, but a report leaked by a Canadian military analysis group confirmed that the Gripen proved to be more resistant to weather conditions than the F-35. At the same time, Washington is stepping up the pressure. American lobbyists are holding closed-door meetings with Canadian Defense Ministry officials, threatening possible delays in spare parts deliveries and a review of export licenses. One such case made it into the press. The American delegation allegedly questioned Canada's ability to receive timely service even for F-35s that had already been ordered if it did not abandon negotiations with Saab. This caused a real scandal in Parliament, as such actions are seen as an attempt to interfere in internal defense policy. Canada's position is becoming increasingly fragile with each passing day. On the one hand, there are commitments to NATO allies, the need to maintain combat readiness, and participation in international missions. On the other hand, there is growing distrust of strategic decisions that depend on the will of others. It is in this context that the idea of a mixed fleet is increasingly being mentioned, retaining some of the F-35s for missions requiring stealth technology and integration into the American network structure, and purchasing large numbers of Gripen aircraft for domestic and Arctic tasks. This approach reduces costs, strengthens defense infrastructure, and most importantly, reduces dependence on U.S. political decisions. At the same time, Sweden is taking an unprecedented step, offering Canada an exclusive license to assemble Gripen aircraft in the country, including full localization of 70% of production. This proposal is backed by the EU, which promises to allocate subsidies for the development of Canada's industrial base as part of a program to strengthen transatlantic cooperation. Such a proposal looks not only profitable, but also strategically thought out. Thus, the choice between the F-35 and Gripen goes far beyond the purchase of military equipment. It is a choice between subordination and autonomy, between a stable but imposed system and a more risky but independent course. The political climate within the country is changing, and with each passing day, Gripen is becoming not just an aircraft, but a symbol of change. While political debates continue in Ottawa and experts weigh the pros and cons of the F-35, a very different picture is unfolding outside Canada, a rapid growth in interest in the Swedish Gripen around the world. And this interest is no accident. It is a logical response to fatigue with the American monopoly in military aviation, which is increasingly accompanied by political conditions, export restrictions, and excessive costs.